So before St Jude was released and before Courteeners were on the scene, obviously we had the Britpop era in the 90s. Can you remember what the UK music scene looked like before Courteeners had released their first album?
Yeah, from a guitar based point of view, it's obviously 15 years of St Jude. That kind of came out like, I suppose you could say, like peak indie landfill era, if you like, which is kind of like a derogatory term towards all the regional indie guitar bands that were like coming through at the time. Um, but in a bizarre kind of turn of events, it's became the way to describe them. I mean, I call it indie landfill, but that's like, that's been my favorite type of music for most of my life. That's what I grew up on, sort of. But yeah, that came along in 2008, was it? So before that, you had like, you even had the Arctic Monkeys, you had the Libertines, you had like the Strokes and the Yeah Yeah Yeahs in the US and that sort of thing. So that kind of like indie rock sound had been around for a while, and I guess it was a little bit kind of cliche that every individual corner of the UK had its own little indie band and that sort of thing. And there was a lot in Manchester and a lot in Yorkshire and that sort of thing. And that's why it got called the landfill, because there was so many of them, and then they all just disappeared. But yeah, Courteeners seem to have held their own amongst a few others, and are still very relevant today. But yeah, I imagine if I was Liam Frey, you'd have been listening to those. You'd been listening to like the Strokes and the Libertines and bands from that Camden indie scene. I presume would have been influence on his life, especially lyrically. You can hear it in the songs as well. But yeah.
Would you say that that era of music is more influential for Courteeners than the Britpop era?
It's hard to say, isn't it? Because obviously, he would have been so heavily influenced by the music in Manchester and that sort of thing. And they've kind of got like a laddiness about them, which definitely came with the Oasis, especially. And I think it's hard to say that one influenced the other more than others, because I presume he would have just consumed it all. But definitely in his formative years, I'll have thought that you know that the Manchester scene, Britpop scene, would have been like the first kind of port of call maybe for his musical upbringing. But you wouldn't have been able to escape it when he was a kid. I couldn't escape it. So he's a similar age to me. So we grew up in similar parts of the world. So I guess definitely would have had a big influence. But it's hard to tell whether one or the other was a bit more influential.
When St Jude came out in 2008, it's quite a raw album. You can tell listening to it that they're still very young. Can you remember what the reaction to the album was when it came out?
The reaction at the time, of what I remember, I spoke about it before, but there was lots of other bands around there, and for me, this is only my personal experience, but they were kind of like thrown in with a lot of other bands. Like they were there in the same ilk as like the Pigeon Detectives, and you could even say like Reverend the Makers and that sort of thing. But at the time, I don't remember it being like, oh my God, you need to listen to this album, because it just kind of felt like there was so much great music. It was like, oh my God, another brilliant album's come out. But they definitely kind of, formed that early fan base early on. And that's why now they've got it to number one and had this late success so many years down the line after releasing it. So it obviously hit home with a lot of people in like a personal kind of way. And I'll be surprised if they don't do it all where they do every kind of track off the album, because you've seen that recently with like Maximo Park and The Enemy and that sort of thing as well. So that there's when it came out, I don't think it didn't like shake up the music scene or anything like that, but it was a well respected good piece of music.
Do you think, obviously, you mentioned a few bands there. Do you think that's what Courteeners have done well, that they've had this longevity, maybe compared to the other bands that they were put with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was, I mean, every now and then, like a tune will pop up, and I'll go, "Oh my God, I remember that band. Whatever happened to that band?" but that could easily have happened to Courteeners. You know, they could have been not 19 forever, and then that could have been it. You know, and they could have been thrown in, you know, with the likes of like Baby Shambles or Dirty Pretty Things or something like that. Or Cajun Dance Party. It's getting quite obscure, but you know, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's the fan base and it's the quality of music, and it just hit home with a lot of people, like in the mid-noughties and that sort of thing. And you know, pop was always there doing its thing in the background, and you know, so it was like R&B and that sort of thing. But for like guitar music, I think it was a great time. But yeah, their longevity is obviously down to their quality, but also their really loyal fan base as well. So there's only another like handful of bands who've still got that following. Like the Libertines are still going strong. Obviously got the Arctic Monkeys who are like enormous. They're on a different level. But you know, bands who are you thought would kind of disappear. And you know what? You could have possibly put the Courteeners into that bracket at one point, because a few years ago they released some music, and I think people were kind of a little bit unsure about like the heavy jacket kind of era and that sort of thing. I don't think that was too popular. But yeah, you look at that. You look at the like the Kooks, the Wombats, and the Courteeners as well. You know, they're kind of still going strong, which is, you know, props to them, because it's not easy to have survived this long after your peak, I suppose.
Yeah. With the fan base, what do you think is maybe the biggest thing? Because maybe they gripped people as they were just turning into their 20s at that young age.
Sorry, can you say that again? It just kind of broke up a little bit.
So I was just saying, with obviously they've gripped a fan base that's remained loyal. Do you think the biggest thing for that was gripping people while they were 18, 19, 20, getting them in those years while they were first going out?
Yeah, definitely. And you know, that's what a lot of their music's about, right? Like the opening line to like Not 19 Forever, like tried to peel me off the pavement. Like it's such a great like line to you know, not sum up, but a relatable kind of line for people in their teens who are like, you know, going out to gigs and nightclubs and that sort of thing. So I think that sort of thing almost definitely kind of hit home. And like a lot of the music, like in that like mid-noughties era from these bands, was about going out and getting on the lash and that sort of thing. You know, I bet you look good on the dance floor. What a waster from Libertines, that sort of thing. Last Night by the Strokes, like they're all about going out and, you know, having a heavy one basically. And I think now that, you know, the fans who probably discovered them then, you know, they're all like in their late 20s or 30s, all that sort of thing. So I guess they kind of want to, like, it's like everyone, isn't it? You want to hark back to the good times once, you know, you've got a job and you've got like kids and all the responsibilities and that sort of thing. So having that like comfort of knowing that that band's still there and you can still go and see them in like a big room as well. Play tunes you were loving when you were 15, 16 or whatever, like it's quite comforting. So I think, you know, nostalgia is a big factor, right? But you know, it's not often enough just nostalgia, it's the quality as well. So yeah, I think that's why people love them so much.
With the loyal fan base, obviously you've mentioned the Heavy Jacket album that maybe underwhelmed people. You think having such a loyal fan base is one of the main reasons that they're at number one now, because they're able to stick with them through maybe the tougher times?
Yeah, I'd say definitely. It's definitely part of that nostalgia uh, factor again. But yeah, that's definitely the thing. Like you fall in love with the band early doors, and then if they carry on through the years, you know, the music all of a sudden tends to dwindle for most bands. I mean, even look at like Oasis. Like Oasis could be another example of that. You know, their first couple of albums were brilliant, and then they started to slide and a little bit and that sort of thing. And the same with the Libertines, the Strokes as well. Like they were all, you know, massive headline acts, but it's those early albums which seem to kind of like plant the seed and form the fan base initially. But in terms of like going to number one, I mean, when that album came out, it came out at a very different time in how people access their music. So I know downloads were more of a thing then. Streaming, I don't think was even a thing 15 years ago. So it would have been people downloading things onto their iPods, probably still buying CDs, like vinyl. It hadn't like really like it was in that weird phase where vinyl had come down and it was yet to go back up again. So they were kind of in that trough of vinyl, so they wouldn't have got many physical sales from that. Whereas now, um, the album chart, especially, that is very heavily based around vinyl. So I'd be quite interested to know how many vinyls they sold on this, because not many people are going out and downloading an album now. Like, it's not even an option anymore. Don't know if it is. And people buying CDs maybe, but the majority will definitely be buying the vinyl St Jude album. And yeah, I think if you're like, I mean, who else has released music recently? Miley Cyrus is #1 in the singles chart right now, right? Her fans aren't going out and buying that on vinyl; they're streaming it, on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever. So I think the effect that the fact that the music purchasing market has changed as well has also helped. But it's a great album, so it deserves to be #1.
So they've reissued it recently, haven't they? And they've got CDs and vinyls on sale right now. Maybe that was a big factor.
Oh, there you go. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. If you're putting in different options, everyone's trying to save money at the moment. So if you don't want to spend 20-25 quid on a vinyl record, then why not just buy the CD for half the price, and that still counts towards a sale. So
yeah. Do you think the #1 album is long overdue for Courteeners?
I'd say so. I mean, it's quite bizarre to see these bands that have like a massive following and they've been going for years and they don't have like a #1 album to their name. And you think of Courteeners, you think of St Jude. That's like the first album that like comes to mind. So to see that kind of like get reissued and climb back up to the top of the album charts, I think it's like a long time coming. And who knows? He might reissue another album a little bit down the line, and that'll go to #1 as well, maybe. But there'll be other bands who re-release records, who would want a #1 back in the day, but could possibly get it now. So yeah, I'm sure Courteeners won't be the last one this year to re-release an album for it to go to #1.
Yeah. I just want to touch on the fan base again.
Okay.
Obviously, Courteeners have played two big gigs at Heaton Park, and they've had two big gigs at the Old Trafford Cricket Ground. Do you think that shows how loved they are in Manchester as compared to the other parts of the country?
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those things. It's definitely like a northern thing as well, or like a regional thing. It's not so much in like, well, I mean, speaking as a man from Liverpool, I know that people of Liverpool are incredibly passionate about bands from my city. And, Manchester's only a half an hour, 40-minute drive down the road, and it's exactly the same there. There's just as much pride in Manchester about their bands as there is in Liverpool for their bands. So that's why you'll always see Courteeners' first sold out date. It'll be like the Manchester show or something like that. And that's why they can play those massive spaces in Manchester, because they know they're going to get, not just, millennials, but they're going to get this new kind of like Gen Z like fan group that are kind of like falling into their lap now. So it'd be interesting to see like how they kind of how their kind of like crowds look. Like my cousin's going to go see Snoop Dogg in a few weeks in Manchester, and I'm like, I think that's going to be a really old crowd. He's like, no, it'll be great. I'm like, no, it'll be an old crowd. Whereas Courteeners, I think it'll probably give me like a good balance of, people probably like it's their early 40s and probably as young as like, mid-teens and that sort of thing. But yeah.
Yeah, I was at the last one at Old Trafford at the end of 2021, and there was a real mixture of people at my age, like just before their 20s, and then you'd be stood next to someone probably like at the brink of their 40s. It's a little bit
Yeah,
weird
yeah,
at
yeah.
times, but
Yeah, no, that's great though. I love that. I
they're
love it
playing
when
a
you get a
third
good
night.
mix.
Yeah, it was a good atmosphere, to be fair. Everyone got along, but it just felt a little bit odd looking to your right and someone could be a parent. But
Yeah, no, I get what you mean. Yeah.
they're playing a third night at Heaton Park this upcoming summer. Do you think that is a good move, or do you think maybe they should be looking at a UK tour, or is it a case of if it's not broke, don't fix it?
Um, Yeah, I guess it's hard to say because like touring is so expensive. It costs so much money. You have to hire so many people. You have to spend so much money on insurance to go on like say like a 12-day tour of the UK or something like that. And they never really fall into a kind of like, well, they don't often fall into an organized kind of manner. It'll be like, well, we got a night in Liverpool, but then we've got to go to Belfast, and then we've got to go to Cardiff, and then we've got to go back over to Dublin, and then Glasgow. And it's not like, in a straight line or anything like that. So it's a lot of time on the road. Whereas just playing, a massive gig in Heaton Park, for example, where they can probably get about, you can probably have the capacity of about 6 of those gigs just in one venue. So they make a lot more money off of that. And you've seen it with like Liam Gallagher playing Nebworth last summer. Like they kind of become like a cultural moment, right? Because so many people were there. So I feel like, there's a lot of weight on the shoulder of the bands for those big gigs, but having a massive crowd, the more people who experience that, the more of a cultural moment it becomes. So I think, yeah, I think from a cultural point of view and a financial point of view, and if everyone enjoys it, just why not?
Yeah. Just finally to finish off, everyone that I've spoke to so far, I want their personal opinion of what they want to see Courteeners do next. Obviously, they've reached their first number one. Would you want to see more albums from Courteeners, or would you be happy if they kind of slowed things down now?
That's a good question. If they slowed things down, then they wouldn't go out and do shows, right? As in, they wouldn't release any new music, so they wouldn't have a reason to go out and write anything new, or tour that music or anything. So I mean, they could do another, they could do a 20-year anniversary tour of St Jude if they want, but you don't want to be flogging the same dead horse. You want to be releasing new stuff, even if you just put a couple of new tracks into the set and then play, back catalogue stuff. Then do that. But what I want to see from Courteeners next? I honestly don't know how to answer that question, because you can look at like Arctic Monkeys and how they've like drastically changed their sounds, and I love the new stuff that they do, but I also love the old stuff. And I feel if they went back to trying to do the stuff they were doing 15 years ago, then I'd be kind of like, oh, that's a bit of a bizarre thing. Why have they done that? And it's the same with Courteeners, right? Because they've changed their sound down the years, but maybe not. Well, definitely not as much to the success of Arctic Monkeys have had. So maybe I'd quite like to see them do something a little bit different with their music, but in their live shows, I'd quite like them to lean still quite heavily on the first couple of albums, especially St Jude. So yeah, I think that's what I would personally probably want from the Courteeners. Yeah.